And then this guy said to me, Claire, what's your organisation? Like, what's it called? So I said, Frontline 19. And he started to tear up, and he was a doctor. And I was like, are you okay? Thinking, oh gosh, maybe he needs some support. And he went, your organisation saved me during the pandemic. I remember talking to my mum and dad one day and looking on the TV thinking, that woman looks familiar, then realising it was me. Kids will call you on stuff that other people won't. They're like, I remember probably year 2 of doing Frontline 19, the kids would say, are you working again, Mum?
Mm-hmm.
And one day I said, what do you mean? They said, well, you're always on your laptop, you're always working. And I thought, they're right. I'd be eating dinner, and I thought, I can't do this anymore.
My guest for this episode is Claire Goodwin-Fee. Claire is a psychotherapist, changemaker, author, and the founder of Frontline 19, an organisation that has provided free psychological support for nearly 1 million NHS and frontline workers across the UK. With a passion for empowering others to realise their potential, Claire's on a mission to inspire better well-being and transform perceptions of mental health. She's also writing her debut novel, loves TikTok, dogs, books and stationery, so this is going to be a fun conversation. I first met Claire at a Do Lectures event earlier this year. She's got amazing energy and an even more amazing story of purpose and passion, so I had to get her on the podcast to share it with you. If you enjoy what you hear, please leave a review, like, comment and subscribe. It would mean the world to me and will help this podcast reach as many people as possible. You don't want to miss this. Enjoy. Claire, welcome to the show. My first question for you, in life, what is the most important thing that you've ever had to pitch for?
Ooh, that's a big one. I don't know, really. I think there's been probably a few things that would be on the same level. Probably trying to get the government on board, the previous government on board with helping out the NHS workers was probably the biggest one and the most that I felt terribly unprepared for. So probably that. But that was a couple of years ago. But yeah, probably that, I would say.
I'd love to delve into that in a little bit more detail as we go through the podcast. But if that kind of convincing the government to put their hands in their pockets, help out is the big thing. Is there anything that you think, throughout your career that you look back and go, oh, that one got away? Like, I'd love to have known what happened if I'd have gone down that path.
Oh, loads of stuff. I think you learn more from the ones that kind of scurry away from or you kind of miss the boat on. I had an opportunity to work with a very big, who's gone on to be an incredibly huge celebrity, I guess, for in the business world. And I pitched it completely wrong, went in too high, and I kicked my own butt for quite some time about that. But having said that, if that had kind of panned out the way that I thought it was going to, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. And I like what I'm doing today.
Yeah.
So really again, yeah, I mean, I did kick my own butt for quite some time about that one.
Any tips for how to get over that kicking your own butt piece?
I think you just got to get over yourself. Everyone makes mistakes, and being a perfectionist or a recovering perfectionist, I think you've just got to just go with the flow. You're not going to get it right all the time. It's really human, and just to remind yourself of that fact. And yeah, just be human about it. Shit happens. Yeah, just get on with it. Learn from it. Think, okay, I forgive myself. I'll kind of learn from that and move on. Just don't keep churning over in your mind all the time, but just pick the learning out of it.
I think that's so important. It's it's hard to see it as a gift in that moment, but if you can kind of like objectively look back on it, you go, oh, I learned that, I'd never do that again, I definitely do that next time. And there's just so much there if you're willing to look for it.
And sometimes it's about letting go of the ego, because we all get things wrong and it stings, and no one likes to think, oh gosh, I thought that was going to happen, then it's like it hasn't. And your ego takes a little bit of a battering, but that's just how life is. Everybody has ups and downs.
Absolutely. So you are a psychotherapist. You're the CEO and founder of an amazing organisation called Frontline 19, which is providing free emotional and psychological support for NHS workers. You're a recipient of the Prime Minister's Points of Light Award. You're Lockdown Hero of the Year. You're continually being asked to speak and regularly appear in the media. But like, what is your story? Like, as a kid, like, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Do you know, I never really had an idea. My kind of backstory is a little bit, and the weird thing is, I didn't really realise that this was unusual until probably about 10 years ago. So my earliest memory is probably when I was around 7 or 8, and my dad at the time was a policeman, and my mum was working as a social worker. And my dad was in a bombing in London, in a terrorist bombing in London. And I remember sitting in front of the TV, watching kids' programmes on a Saturday. It was just before Christmas. And back then, when the kind of news flash came across and they interrupted broadcasting and kind of said there'd been this bombing in London, my sister and I were just kind of like thinking, oh, this is a bit strange. But my mum responded really bizarrely. And we were like, what's wrong with mum? And it's because my dad was at the Harrods bombing in London.
Oh, wow.
And obviously she didn't know whether he'd been injured or worse. And so that had a massive, massive impact on my upbringing. And so it was literally like a bomb going off in our family, emotionally speaking. And then so fast forward, kind of, I was a 100% people pleaser. 100% people pleaser. I used to get myself into these situations where I'd get promoted to do these jobs and people were like, this is amazing. And I had what I call the Russian doll syndrome. So the inside of me was this big, but the outside was this big. And so I felt very, very insecure, had very low self-esteem and self-worth. And at the age of 20, I had a breakdown. I was going to work, had a really good job in the city, earning lots of money on paper, looked amazing, but was desperately unhappy. And so I had a breakdown and basically didn't leave home for about 6 months, literally didn't go outside the door.
Wow.
And once I had started to recover from that, I thought it'd be a good idea to have some counselling, some therapy to kind of readdress some of the issues that I'd gone through as a kid.
Yeah.
I still laugh about it now because the first lady I went to see, I was such an angry person at that point. I remember sitting there thinking, I'm not talking to you. She had like an Alice band on and was kind of, I mean, I was so judgmental. You know, she looked like a Laura Ashley had thrown up all over her, and I was really quite, I'm not talking to you. What the hell could you possibly understand about my life? And then the second person at that point, I was so desperate for help, was a very religious, she didn't swear, very softly spoken, amazing human being who I would credit with absolutely saving my life. Wow. And she helped me. And by the end of our time together, she said to me, you'd be really good as a therapist. And I remember rolling my eyes thinking, and this is, and I apologise in advance, but this is literally what went through my head. I thought, you've got to be fucking joking me. Who the hell would want to listen to other people's shit all day? How depressing. Which makes me really laugh now because I've now been a therapist for 20 years and I love it. It's a huge passion of mine. I love working with other humans and I feel so privileged to do so. So it always makes me chuckle when I think back to that moment.
Yeah, what an amazing kind of journey.
Like, who'd want to do that?
So just talk to me a bit about that transition. So was your dad injured in that terrorist attack?
So physically not, emotionally very much so.
Yes.
Yeah, right. He had undiagnosed PTSD and he had a lot of survivor guilt, which is when, so what had happened, his friend, they were both police dog handlers at the time. And so my dad was supposed to go around and relieve this guy so he could go on his break. And they had a conversation about something. And the guy went, no, look, take my break. And he was going to go and do some shopping for my mum, Christmas shopping for my mum. And they swapped breaks. And as my dad walked around the corner, the bomb went off and literally pushed him off his feet.
Right.
And the chap that he'd been talking to was terribly injured, like life-changing injuries. And I think 6 people died as a result of the bombing.
Yeah.
And so he had a lot of He only ever spoke about it once to me, and that was when I was just finishing my therapist training.
Mm-hmm.
And it was late at night, and I think I'd been doing an essay or something, and we started talking about something to do with trauma, and he was kind of trying to ask me about different things, and I said, well, what actually happened? And when he told me, it was absolutely horrific. And I said to him, why did you never talk to anyone about this? He went, there wasn't anybody to talk to about it. And I remember saying to him, well, how did you cope with it? He went, well, we just went back to the NIC, the police station, and we just had breakfast and had a laugh and sort of joked amongst ourselves, and that was it. And this, you know, some of the things were absolutely horrifically experienced. And then he started to talk about, you know, when he'd been called to a train crash, and his job was identifying body parts and phoning them through to a lady at Scotland Yard who ended up fainting because it was so graphic. And it was like things after things after things. And I was like, and I guess that's probably when the seed was properly sown about helping people on the front lines. You know, yes, NHS workers, but we also help police, fire, all sorts of paramedics, ambulance techs, all sorts of different people. Because the support isn't really there. And part of, I think, the issue is the fact that they don't really talk about how difficult their jobs are.
Yeah.
You know, I often think about, I see the blue light, you know, if you're waiting to cross the road in London, you see it quite a lot. You hear the sirens, and I think to myself, you know, that's somebody hopefully having a one-off bad day, and it's hopefully not too bad. But for somebody that works in that sphere, that is one call out of maybe 8 or 9 that day that could be life-changing for the people they're dealing with. And you know, how do they manage that? So yeah, it's quite a heavy topic, but I do underpin that with, it is so important to have fun. And although I'm passionate about what I do, I just think that mental health doesn't have to be depressing. It is about embracing all parts of it and doing what you can when you can.
It's fascinating. I never really kind of considered the other side of that relationship of, you know, those frontline staff that are there to help. My daughter, when she was 1, had quite a severe burns injury, and you know, I remember the ambulance crew arriving, and I was in the shower. I got into the shower, and we were just you know, putting cold water over it, and you know, I'm there. But for them, we had some amazing counselling after that, and you know, that really helped us through, you know, several months of sessions for Laura and I. But that ambulance crew didn't get any, as far as I know, any support for coming in and seeing a family in a deep state of trauma, and yet it's just kind of seen as part of the job.
Yeah.
So you moved into a counselling role. Was that within the NHS itself?
So my first training was with the NHS. So the training that I first took was with the NHS, and obviously then I went on to university. And then my first placement was in a GP's surgery. And it's funny because, again, I hadn't really considered this until now, that it's no surprise that I'm working with frontline workers, because actually, you know, I'd be in the tea room between sessions, and one of those doctors would like sidle up and start talking about some kind of problem or issue or difficulty that they were struggling with, and we'd have a brief chat, and then they'd sidle off again. And so I think probably subconsciously I was aware that there was a problem with support, you know, with frontline staff. But yeah, you know, there are pockets of support available, but there's so much stigma attached to people asking for help, because it's like the helpers are supposed to rock in. It's funny, yesterday on LinkedIn, I was looking at a conversation with a guy in America who, I forget what his kind of job title was, but he was talking about the Secret Service and kind of about an assassination attempt on Donald Trump. And there were people in the comments saying, you know, the Secret Service froze, that's what they get paid for, this is outrageous. And I'm like, they're human beings at the end of the day. Like we expect people to be robots, and then when they behave like robots, we then criticize them for not having any empathy and compassion. And it's like, at what point do you accept that human beings will make mistakes and won't perhaps do things the way that you want them to do them? And so I think there's a lot of judgment about certain professions and roles within society about what people should and shouldn't do. But at the end of the day, we're all human.
Yeah. I don't know why it's triggered a strange Thunderbirds memory for me, but there's a line in the film where the Hood's kind of taken over and trapped us up on Thunderbird 5, and the line is, "Who will rescue the rescuers?"
Yeah,
And I think it's really, really poignant. It's like, well, in this case, in our little fictional fun, kids film, it's the three brave kids, but there does need to be that support. You
absolutely.
can't do it all on your own.
No, and whatever, because some people sort of have the attitude, even people that do the work, that somehow they should be okay with it, like they should be able to manage this. And I'm like, well, if you were a marathon runner and then after 10 years you needed a hip replacement or knee surgery, you wouldn't say, well, that's my fault because I've been weak. You'd say, well, it's wear and tear from doing what I've done. And it's the same with this. You're going to get any human being that goes into very traumatic, difficult situations. There's going to be wear and tear on you emotionally. And yes, more can be done in a preventative way to help with resilience and all of that stuff. But also, there is a cost to pay for working in the environment that they do.
Yeah.
The same with therapists. You have to balance it out with having really good boundaries and kind of knowing when your working day finishes and all of this stuff. And I just think we just need to be kinder to ourselves if we're in that environment, but also kinder to the people that are actually working in that space.
Yeah.
Because our expectations sometimes can be sky high.
I mean, it's really amplified, I think, in that frontline environment. But actually, as you say those words to me, so much of that is just for human beings in life as well. As business owners, as employees, I think about the importance of having a support team. Like, I think of my personal trainer as part of my support team. Last night I went to see my massage guy, and he's absolutely amazing. And it's a reset. You and I met at a retreat, essentially, where we were going to kind of just reground and recenter. And that is just so important, I think. Whatever you do, whether you're, a school teacher, a business assistant, a filmmaker, it doesn't matter. You've got to put people around you that allow you to offload some of the stuff that's going on, and allow you that opportunity to kind of, relax, talk about your day, not keep it all to yourself, because that can be pretty dark no matter what line of work you do.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's just recognizing that we all need that. I couldn't do the work that I do without having that support around me.
Yeah.
It would make it deeply unpleasant. So no, it is so important. And also to do the things that are fun outside of that. That's really important, to invest time in doing things that, the retreat that we met on, I was exhausted when I rocked up. I mean, the fact that I fell asleep in the middle of a room full of people while we were doing breath work was a new for me. But, I think that, again, it is about finding your level and making sure that you put the things in place to support your own health.
Yeah.
Because, as that old saying goes, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So talk to me a little bit about how Frontline 19 came about.
I want to say I had no idea, but I kind of do. It started off the day before the very first lockdown in the UK in March 2020. I'd been thinking, like a lot of people, how possibly I could help the NHS and frontline services, because my dad's life had been saved by the NHS back in 2018. He'd had a brain infection and sepsis and had had all sorts of complications and had been put into an induced coma for a few weeks. And at that time, they were amazing in supporting myself and my family, and kind of really went the extra mile. And so back to the pandemic, I kept thinking about these people that I'd met in intensive care and how I could support them. And I was thinking, well, I could do cooking, or it could be like, what could I do? And I thought, well, something I do know quite a bit about is therapy. And I know a lot of therapists because that's been my industry for quite a long time. And so I thought if I could match the two together, give people that perhaps needed some time and some people that might be willing to volunteer some time to support that, match them up together, and that could be something that could work. And so it was a very small idea, and I set up a very simple Facebook page with no idea about what was going to happen. And so I literally set myself a target, and people laugh at this when I say this, but this is so true. I thought if I could help 30 or 40 people, that'd be great. And I thought, right, just make it 50. That feels like a big number. And I remember my stomach clenching. Gosh, that feels like a lot of people. And it is a lot of people.
It is, yeah.
And then pressing the button, and within the first day, we had 750 people come in and ask for support.
Wow.
And then, this year we will have helped over 1 million people. And I don't know how it scaled that quickly, but it well, I do, I guess. The need was there.
Yeah.
But it kind of blows my mind a bit. I don't even know what 1 million people looks like. So, to kind of imagine that. People say, what do you think about that? I don't really know. To be fair, I think I'm still getting my head around it myself.
Mm-hmm. It's
and
huge.
Then that was it. It was a runaway train that kind of had left the station, and this stuff was taking on a life of its own.
So how did you kind of get on top of that runaway train? Because I mean, these things need structure. You can't help 1 million people just with a Facebook page. You've got to start organizing. You've got to set up a company. So you've set Frontline 19 up as a community interest company. Like, have you gone a purpose? Always seems to be such an important topic. Like, how have you defined the purpose of the organization, and what kind of iterations have you been through to work that out?
So at that time, everything was shut because obviously we were in the middle of the pandemic, and then we knew that we needed some funding to kind of try and hold this mass of people. So, we needed a website, we needed, some kind of software to manage the amount of people that were asking for support.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't comfortable with any of the money coming into my bank account. I wanted to make it completely separate.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, the best way to do that was to open something in order to get a business account and make it completely separate. And the only thing we could get open at that point in time was a KIC, community interest company. And we did that, opened the bank account, and then kind of funneled funds and stuff there. But I think from the start, it was very clear about the support that was needed in that moment. I mean, at the start of the pandemic, the first people that came up were teachers. They were petrified of catching the virus because obviously they were still working. A lot of them were looking after key workers' children.
Yeah.
The irony was I was a key worker myself very much when I started this. I was working with children that were in care and had struggled with trauma, and children that had been through a lot of trauma. So I was doing that work. Plus I had my own private practice, and I had corporate work that I was also doing. And so life was incredibly busy.
Yeah.
I had to take all of that online. And so it was a case of, and I was homeschooling as well. My son at the time, he was five and a bit.
Fun days.
And I also had a 2.5-year-old. So looking back, how did I manage it? I don't know. Don't take any tips from me. I have no idea. I look back now thinking, well, it's no wonder I'm tired. Don't really know.
So how did there must have been some kind of fear or imposter syndrome or whatever you want to call it in the chaos as this thing kind of, as you say, took on a life of its own. How have you kind of overcome that? How have you kind of got comfortable with?
I laugh at it a lot.
Yeah.
I think it's really funny. I often reference Jay from The Inbetweeners, the guy that tells all these really tall stories. And I felt like that for 2 years. Like my friend would say, what's happened this week? And I'd be like, yeah, I had a conversation with Prime Minister, pop star, blah, 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 blah. I'd done all these media things. And I think my friends really helped me because they'd see me on TV on, I don't know, News at 10 or whatever. And they'd send me pictures of themselves pulling silly faces next to me on the screen, which would make me really laugh. So things like that. And also I remember talking to my mum and dad one day and looking on the TV thinking, that woman looks familiar, and then realising it was me. Excuse me. So I just think, I'm serious about what I do, but the other bits and pieces are just part of the vehicle. But no, it was really weird. It was very weird. I think it was probably a little bit easier because I was obviously we were all on lockdown.
Yeah.
It was a little bit easy because a lot of the stuff that I first did, particularly with media and TV stuff, was on Zoom. But it was also very, very odd, being in my home and getting phone calls from Matt Hancock, who was obviously the health secretary at the time, and Boris Johnson, and who was the PM, and all these weird and wonderful people that I would never in a million years kind of have any kind of cause to have conversations with.
Yeah.
And there were times where it was I used to get what I call excitement headaches. It would be like this, it wasn't nerves per se, but it was like, how has this happened? And the speed at which it went didn't really allow me to kind of get my head around that until about 2 years into what we were doing. And I remember standing in London, doing this speech on top of a fire engine, and there were 10,000 people there. It's me standing on the top of this thing, doing this speech, and there was this famous actor standing next to me, and I just thought, what's happened here? I'm like, how have I got to this where this is normal? And then the march that I was on when I did this speech, we were right at the front, and then this guy said to me, Claire, what's your organisation? Like, what's it called? So I said, Frontline 19. And he started to tear up, and he was a doctor. And I was like, are you okay? Thinking, oh gosh, maybe he needs some support. And he went, your organisation saved me during the pandemic.
Wow.
And it took my breath away. And I said, really? And he went, yeah. He said, I spoke to one of your counsellors regularly. He said, I was based in a big London hospital that was hit incredibly hard. He said, and if it hadn't have been for you guys, I wouldn't be here. Well, then I started crying. He's then crying. We're at the front of this march holding this banner thing. There's all, press and stuff around me. I tread on this guy's foot and I say, I'm terribly sorry. And as he turns around, it's Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, how do you ever get your head around that? You just can't, can you? Just go, well, that's bizarre.
Yeah. So with these, with the speeches on top of the fire engines, like, were you planning those? Were you scripting it? Were you just speaking off the cuff?
So I find that I have ADHD, and so I find that if I try and memorise, there are certain points that I want to hit.
Yeah.
But I try not to script it too much. I've been asked to do a TEDx talk, and I've put it off because I know that they're very keen on it being kind of very scripted. And so until I get to the point where I can really lock onto that, it's kind of there. It will happen, but not for a bit. But no, I kind of had things that I want to say, and I'm passionate about what I'm doing. And so I find it fairly easy to kind of go with the flow and just to kind of hit the points that I want to point. But no, I'm not very good at scripting it. I find it much easier to do it with certain points and then off the cuff. Yeah.
I mean, when I'm working with clients, I always try and encourage them to work in that way, because I think learning lines is really difficult. I mean, as an actor, it was something that you just spend hours and hours and hours on, and then you fluff it up, and that throw you completely. And I think there's something about being able to connect with your audience that is so important, and to do that, speaking words that you've written as if for the first time is a real skill. So I think you're doing absolutely the right thing in approaching it in that way. You're very high energy, and sometimes that was a compliment, by the way, that sometimes that can work against you in those kind of high stakes environments, because the adrenaline kicks in and then you're completely off the scale. Do you ever have to do anything to kind of ground yourself and kind of calm yourself down?
Yeah, often. I often ground myself, and it's funny. I use my hyperfocus for my ADHD when I'm working, because people often say, I mean, you've probably seen a much lighter version of me, and I often am bouncing around like Tigger and that high energy bit. But I also can be very different from that and sit very still and be very much in the moment and very focused in what I do. And so that does take its toll, because that hyper focus takes a lot of energy as well. But it's a much more internal, quieter energy.
Yeah.
But it's funny because people say, oh, you're such an open book. I'm not. I am to a certain point, and then there's a part of me that's very private, and I love being around people until I don't, and then I need to have peace and quiet. So the retreat that we did, I stayed off site, because I need that peace and quiet and that complete, silence, and just that's my idea of heaven is kind of being on my own with some quiet, and people don't often realize that about me, but that's an essential part, I think, that allows me to do what I do.
That's really interesting. I mean, I think that resilience in any line of work is sort of a really important skill to develop. And that seems to be part of your kind of resilience toolkit, if you like, that ability to take yourself off and be on your own. I'm very similar in that sense. People will say to me, oh, you must be an extrovert, you're an actor. And I was like, actually, I can turn that on in those environments, but actually then I need to go and lie in a in a dark room and be away from people, otherwise it's too much, it's overwhelming. Have you got any tips for people listening around that resilience element and how to take care of themselves? If you were working with a client, or someone was asking you for help, what would you suggest as a first kind of step?
I think you really have to listen to your body and kind of know that the body and the mind are so connected. A lot of people still think it's so separate.
Yeah.
And I often say to people, my clients, the car and the engine are part and parcel of the same vehicle. You can't ignore one and expect the other to work. It just can't happen. And so I think you really need to tune into what you need. So if it's sleep, do that. If it's water, hydration is really important. What you eat is really important, but also it's about allowing yourself to feel how you feel, feel all the feels. If you're angry, allow that to happen, because actually no emotions are bad. But it's like anything, if you get stuck in those, like if a train gets stuck in the station, that's going to be problematic. But feel how you feel. It's the management of how you feel that's important. There are some situations where you can be more free about what you think, and there are other times when you can't be, and that's okay. So whether it's journaling, punching a pillow if it's really extreme, or whatever it is, do yourself a list now before you get in situations that you find difficult to manage. So for example, I worked with someone and we spoke about when they get particularly angry, positive things that they could do to help manage that. And it's not about kind of slapping a smile on your face and going, I'm so happy, yes, this is fine, because toxic positivity is just as damaging as not. It just puts that horrible lid on things, and that's not healthy either. And it's about being able to say, I feel really angry, and noticing where that sits in your body. I feel really angry today. Like, this happened, and when you did that, I felt really angry.
Yeah.
And being able to communicate. So work out how you feel, work out the way that you can communicate that in a way that is useful for you and that conveys how you feel to somebody else. That's the utter essence of communication. And a lot of the time, if somebody just listens to you, that's the superpower that a lot of people need. If you just listen to that person and you really intensely hear what they say, you can actually see them, and that can be so healing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love what you said just then about understand where it sits in your body. And I think as an actor, that was a real kind of skill that we would use to kind of literally embody the emotion of the character, and you'd have to find a way to create that physical sensation. But this is the flip side, that kind of awareness that this energy will move around, and sometimes you're stuck in your head, and sometimes it's kind of in your chest or in your gut, and that's okay. You've just got to, if you allow it to flow and find its way out, rather than trying
Definitely.
to put the lid on it all the time.
And finding a way that works for you.
Yeah.
That's the key. Because
Yeah.
what might work for someone else may not work for you. And I think I get a little frustrated when people talk about self-care because they think it's all face masks, and it's so much more than that. It's not external, it's an internal process about what you need in that moment. And actually, I've got 2 young boys, and I'm teaching them about what's in their resilience toolkit. And if they're really sad, they might say, Mum, I'm going to go in my room and read for a bit and take myself out of it. Okay.
Yeah.
Or they might be full of energy and kind of be a bit wired. And I'm like, okay, let's do something physical. So it is about tuning into what you're feeling and where you're feeling it, and learning what those cues mean. And then you can utilize those for building up your resilience kit. And that will change over years of things, as you say. You and I now know that there comes a certain point where perhaps you need that quiet time. And I love that. That's one of my favorite things to do. But then that allows me then to do all the other great stuff that I get to do.
Yeah. How with the family? I mean, you're running a very high pressured business essentially, and juggling lots of different balls all the time. How do you go about striking that balance, if there is such a thing, between work and family life?
I try to limit my traveling time. So if I'm away for something, I'm not away for longer than about 5 or 6 days. That's my kind of maximum. And I try not to go away more than once a month. And then on top of that, when I am at home, I'm around for breakfast every morning. And I also am around when the kids come out of school. I'm very lucky my husband's now a house husband, because we had to kind of balance up, looking after the kids. And so I'm around quite a bit.
Yeah.
And when I'm with them, I'm really with them. I try to be really present and listen to them. It's so easy to be flicking through, an email on your phone or doing other stuff. So I try really hard. I don't have any of the notifications on my phone at all.
Yeah.
It hasn't rung in probably 10 years, because it's always on vibrate or separate.
Yeah,
then
silent.
That way
Yeah.
I can look, and then it's not that kind of jarring. But just again, I don't always get it right. And if I don't get it right, I admit to my kids, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. That wasn't what I wanted to do, or that's not how I wanted things to be. And, I do get grumpy when I'm tired. They're like, Mum, you're really grumpy. I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm sorry about that. I'm tired. So it is about having these, really, and they'll call you on it.
Yeah.
Kids will call you on stuff that other people won't. They're like, I remember probably year 2 of doing Frontline 19. The kids would say, are you working again, Mum? And one day I said, what do you mean? They said, well, you're always on your laptop, you're always working. And I thought, they're right. I'd be eating dinner, and I thought, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
Because in a flick of a switch, like, they're going to be grown up, and I'm not going to know them. And I don't want this to impact my children or my relationship with my kids. I need to be really present for them. So that's my hard rule. And I've spoken about this before. I've turned down, it sounds really funny, but I've turned down meetings with prime ministers because one of the boys had a award certificate at school. It was a house points thing at their primary school. And, the woman on the phone said, well, I can't believe you're doing this. I said, well, I do it every time.
Yeah.
My family comes before anything else. And particularly through meeting, prime ministers and stuff, my kids are more important, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
And ironically, the one prime minister that I spoke to that really got that, which kind of pains me to say this, was Boris Johnson. The irony in that.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. I mean, I think it's so important to sort of set those boundaries, but they're personal. That it's to do with being, I think, aligned with your own values, and that's what's kind of coming out loud and clear from this conversation, is that every single junction in the road, you've been driven by your values to make the choice of which direction to go in, and I think that's so powerful. And the kind of flip side of that would be if when we make those decisions that are not aligned, that's when the kind of the real pain starts.
Yeah.
Being busy and having lots on your plate and Juggling lots of balls is one thing, but being unhappy is something else. And
there's no point doing it if you're unhappy.
Yeah.
There's no joy in that, and life is so short. I mean, I'm going to be 50 next year. I can't believe I don't feel it at all, and I just think to myself, I've still got so much more I want to do. I'm writing a novel, and there's all sorts of other bits and pieces going on, but I now have the luxury to pick and choose things that I do and don't want to do. And where possible, unless it brings me joy or I think it will be a great thing to do, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah. I've just started implementing a kind of metric for work, which is it simple and is it fun?
Yeah.
And that's been really, really liberating, because you can kind of just look at something and go, no, that's not fun. I just don't want to do that.
And it's not always easy. I mean, I walked away from a massive multi-million-pound contract because it didn't sit with my values.
Mm-hmm.
And I chewed that over for quite some time, but it just didn't sit right. And again, back to kind of how your body feels, your gut feelings and all of that. Every time I've ignored my gut feelings, it's kicked me squarely up the bum.
Yeah.
Every single time. And so I've learned to really kind of go, you really need to listen to this stuff. And there is a whole part of you that is incredibly instinctual, kind of intuitive.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that when you stick to what fits your values and what brings you joy and kind of feels right, I think that's a good thing. That's a good place. That to me is success, when you can do that.
Absolutely. Claire, I could carry on this conversation forever, and we didn't get to talk about dogs, so I'm going to have to get you back to do that at some point. But if I could ask you one final question, if you could go back and give that young girl that was sitting watching TV with her sister one piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh gosh, I'm kind of torn. I just wish she loved herself a bit more, because for years she didn't, and she thought that everything was her fault. And kids, I was a kid. Kids don't have control over so many things. And so just believe in yourself and just know that it's going to be okay. I think that's what I'd say.
Brilliant.
It's always difficult because I wouldn't change anything that's happened. No. And I'm generally thankful for where I am today. But it's been hard, and there's been some really difficult, painful parts of my journey. But I wouldn't, I'd want her to just believe in herself that she could do it, because for a long time, she believed a lot of people around her that told her she couldn't.
And she could. Claire, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to the Why Life's a Pitch podcast. If you'd like to improve the way you pitch and communicate, I'm giving away a special gift to all my listeners. We've developed the Pitching with Impact scorecard to help you benchmark your pitch performance in 6 key areas. It'll take you less than 5 minutes to complete, and you'll receive a detailed, personalised report packed full of insights and ideas to help you improve and grow. Just head over to dominiccolenso.com/scorecard to get started.